Las Vegas. On a late November night in the year 1956, the city was still far smaller than the glittering empire it would one day become. Yet the neon lights already made every sidewalk feel like a stage inhaling its own electricity. On one side of the strip, Elvis Presley was just beginning his unsure courtship with Las Vegas, the young man with a guitar, a new sound, and a reputation that the traditional showroom crowd still regarded with suspicion. Across the way, inside the lavish concert hall of the Riviera Hotel, Liberace reigned as the undisputed king of the city, dazzling capes, theatrical charm, and hands on the piano keys that seemed to speak directly to the spotlights. Two worlds that were never meant to collide. One was the rising symbol of rebellion, still searching for acceptance. The other, a seasoned icon wrapped in applause and luxury. But that night, one offhand comment ignited a moment no one expected. Liberace looked at Elvis and, half joking, half challenging, said, "Real musicians play the piano." Then he placed a crisp $100 bill on the table, daring Elvis to prove what nearly everyone in Vegas assumed he couldn't. No one in the room knew that this tiny spark, a joke, a provocation, a flash of ego would open the door to a story that decades later would still be retold like a scene from a film that refuses to fade. To understand that fateful moment, we have to look back at Las Vegas in the year 1956, a time when the city was only beginning its transformation into America's entertainment capital. The elegant showrooms were dominated by traditional performers, big bands, polished voices, disciplined artistry, and at the center of it all, Liberace shone the brightest. He wasn't merely a pianist, he was a spectacle. Fur capes, glittering jewels, gold-plated pianos, extravagance that seemed born for Vegas. Middle-aged and affluent audiences adored him, seeing him as the epitome of a true musician. Elvis, meanwhile, stood at the opposite end of the spectrum, only 21. He carried a sound that many older listeners considered dangerous. Rock and roll was too loud, too rebellious, too youthful. When Elvis signed on to perform at the new Frontier Hotel, critics questioned whether he could win over a Vegas crowd accustomed to refinement and classic showmanship. One columnist even wrote, "He belongs in smaller theaters, not in Vegas." Elvis knew all of this. He didn't complain, but the pressure was enormous. Every performance felt like a trial, whether the boy from Memphis could hold his ground under skeptical eyes. He kept smiling, kept delivering the wild energy that young audiences adored. Yet deep inside, he carried a quiet grief from the death of his mother, the woman who taught him his earliest piano chords when he was just a poor, shy boy. Liberace, for his part, looked at Elvis with a mixture of curiosity and doubt. He didn't dislike Elvis, he simply didn't understand this new kind of energy. To Liberace, music was discipline, technique, hours of practice. To Elvis, it was instinct, emotion, fire. Two philosophies so different they seemed destined never to share a stage. So, when Elvis arrived anonymously at Liberace's show that night, expecting nothing more than entertainment, fate had other plans. Liberace, ever sharp-eyed and theatrical, instantly recognized the young man seated toward the back, and a thought sparked in his mind tonight. Vegas needs a story, a moment, something unforgettable. He smiled, and from that instant, the Vegas stage was headed toward a collision between two worlds, one built on technique, the other on soul, and no one could predict what would happen once these two artists stood under the same light. The sound of Liberace's piano rolled across the showroom like a perfectly engineered wave. He ended a brilliant solo, spun toward the audience, and opened his arms as though embracing the entire room. Laughter and applause cascaded back at him, and that was when his eyes casually or very intentionally landed on a familiar young face at the back. A smile flickered across his lips, sharp and knowing. The moment had arrived. "Ladies and gentlemen," Liberace began, warm yet mischievous, "we have a very special guest tonight." The room turned as one. Elvis stiffened slightly, wishing only to enjoy the show in peace. But Vegas was not a city where one could hide in the dark. "I hear he's quite talented," Liberace continued, "but—" He paused a theatrical beat. "I also hear he cannot play the piano." The crowd laughed not cruelly, but exuberantly. Still, Elvis felt something tighten inside his chest. "Mr. Presley," Liberace called, extending a hand, "come join me." The audience erupted into chants. Elvis breathed out slowly. He knew he couldn't refuse. He walked toward the stage, modest clothes contrasting the luxury around him, feeling as though he were once again the shy boy at his mother's old, beaten-up piano. Liberace pulled him to the radiant, gold-plated instrument. "How about we switch roles," he suggested, lifting a guitar placed behind him. "You play piano, I'll play guitar." More laughter. Elvis joined in, though softly, carrying a bittersweet edge. "I didn't come here to prove anything," he thought. Yet something about the moment felt different, like a doorway he hadn't expected to open. He sat at the piano. The room dimmed, not literally, but in the way sound retreats before something important happens. Elvis stared at the keys, and for a brief instant, he saw his mother's hands guiding his own small fingers. The memory rose like warm light. Liberace, preparing for a comedic bit with the guitar, asked, "Do you know anything at all?" Elvis. No one expected more than a simple tune. But Elvis placed both hands on the piano, and Liberace's expression shifted. Elvis began with a left-hand bass line, confident and silky. His right hand followed with a hesitant melody that soon blossomed into delicate embellishments, jazz phrasing, subtle runs, a tenderness that didn't belong to a publicity stunt. The room fell silent. Elvis wasn't performing. He was remembering. His fingers traced the language of childhood, of grief, of love long buried. He played something resembling "I'll Remember April," but not as a polished showpiece, as a conversation with a ghost. Liberace slowly lowered the guitar, mesmerized. Elvis continued weaving melody and harmony, left hand steady and right hand dancing with controlled freedom. He did not look up. He did not acknowledge the audience. He sank into the very core of what music meant to him. The final note lingered and the room held its breath before applause exploded like a firestorm. Not because he was Elvis Presley, not because the role reversal was amusing, but because, for a rare moment in Vegas, the crowd witnessed truth. Elvis rose with no triumphant grin, only a distant softness in his eyes. He whispered to Liberace, "My mother taught me when I was little. After she passed, I stopped playing in public." Liberace froze. Something inside him shifted, maybe respect, maybe regret. He lifted the $100 bill. "You win," he said quietly. Elvis shook his head. "I can't take it." Liberace frowned. "Why not? Give it to some kid out there trying to learn music, who isn't being taken seriously." And something profound moved through the room like the temperature changed. Liberace looked at Elvis with no trace of superiority now, only understanding. One moment, one song, one memory. Two artists, two worlds, finally speaking the same language. After that moment, the atmosphere in the room changed entirely. People no longer saw Elvis as the hip-shaking youth idol who made teenagers scream. Nor did they see Liberace as the seasoned master teaching the newcomer a lesson. For a few brief minutes, the boundary between their two worlds, classical refinement and rebellious modernity, dissolved. There was only music, and two human beings recognizing something true in each other. That night, as Elvis left the Riviera, murmurs were already spreading through casino hallways and neon-lit bars. Stories multiplied, exaggerated, reshaped. Some claimed Elvis had outplayed Liberace. Others insisted Liberace had humbled Elvis. Some romanticized it as the moment they became fast friends. The truth, as with all legends, lived somewhere in the middle. One thing was certain from that night on. Liberace looked at Elvis differently, not with the eyes of a veteran judging a younger artist, but with the softened gaze of someone who realized that talent doesn't always show itself in the spotlight. Sometimes, it lies in a quiet moment, a young man at a piano, playing not to impress, but to speak to a memory. As for Elvis, he never discussed that night publicly. No interviews, no anecdotes, no self-congratulation. He kept the moment tucked away inside him, the same way he guarded many of his deepest truths. But those close to him said that after that night, he played piano more often, jazz, hymns, even classical fragments he'd studied as a child, as if that performance at the Riviera had reopened a door he had closed the day his mother died. And then there was the lesson one that Vegas didn't intend to teach, yet did. In the year 1956, rock and roll was treated as a cultural threat. Traditional entertainers dismissed it as noise. Parents feared it. Society divided over it. Yet in just a few minutes at a piano, everyone glimpsed a revelation between generations, between styles, between the old and the new. There existed a single bridge: authenticity. Technique can inspire admiration. Fame can draw spotlights, but only sincerity can make an entire room fall completely silent. And that, not the wager, not the laughter, not even the myth that followed, was the true legacy of the moment Elvis placed his hands on the keys that night. If this moment touched you, the moment an artist placed his hands on the keys and let music speak what words never could, then maybe this story isn't just about Elvis or Liberace. It is also about us. Each of us carries something misunderstood, something judged too quickly, something we've had to prove to the world. And sometimes, a single honest moment is enough to change how others see us. If you've ever felt this, share it in the comments. What was the moment when you realized your true worth? Was it a time you stood up, a time you stepped into the spotlight despite the fear, or a moment when your actions spoke louder than anything you could have said? Let this story remind you that you don't need to shout to be heard. Sometimes one melody, played at the right moment, can change everything. If you want to explore more untold stories from history, the small moments that shaped great legends, subscribe and continue with the next videos. Every story carries its own note. And who knows, the next note might belong to you.